Hi, and welcome to the Frog Pond School of Design, where we talk about a wide variety of architectural issues and sometimes just tell related stories that you might not otherwise have heard. Today I want to talk about something that's fundamental to architecture but often overlooked, and that is the pursuit of pleasing proportions. Architects have always been interested in pleasing proportions because theoretically it makes their buildings look better. But what is pleasing and how do you know? For one thing, we're told that if you ask a whole lot of people to draw a rectangle that they think has pleasing proportions, you'll get rectangles back with a long dimension 1.625 times as long as the short dimension. Obviously, they won't all be that, and none of them will probably be exactly that, but there should be a general clustering in that area. So I think we can look at that and say this is evidence that that proportion is pleasing, at least subjectively. But what's it going to take to give us some objective evidence that that's a good proportion to use as well? This is a golden rectangle, and this thing has been used by the ancient Greeks, artists throughout the centuries. It's just been everywhere in the artistic environment. And you can see that it has a short dimension of x and a long dimension of 1.625x. So does that give us some credibility to, or lend some credibility to the concept that that proportion is pleasing? I think it does, but that's not really an objective assessment yet. The other thing, though, that rectangle can do is it can generate a growing array of rectangles like it. If you take that initial rectangle and you subdivide it into two rectangles so that the larger rectangle is actually a square, the one you have left will be one of the same proportion. And if you go the other direction and you just take this rectangle and you add a square onto the long side, you'll get a larger golden rectangle. And that's what happens when you just keep doing that. You get this array of growing rectangles. And this is oftentimes used to explain a related principle called the Fibonacci sequence. The Fibonacci sequence is normally expressed as a series of numbers where each number is the sum of the two previous numbers in the series. So 1 plus 2 is 3, 2 plus 3 is 5, 3 plus 5 is 8, etc. But I want to do a little aside here and talk about Fibonacci himself, because while I recognize many of you are probably familiar with the Fibonacci sequence, you may not know just who Fibonacci was. He was a 12th century Italian mathematician and generally considered to have been the leading mathematician of the Middle Ages. He lived around Pisa. His real name was Leonardo, so he really was Leonardo of Pisa. The Fibonacci came along a little bit later. But he did something very important. He introduced the Hindu Arabic numeral system to the Western world. So if it hadn't been for Fibonacci, we might still be using Roman numerals. So that's, again, why I think it's important to know a little bit about Fibonacci. Now, if we go back to that growing array of rectangles, it's interesting that it does something else. It generates a spiral. And this, again, may look really familiar to those of you familiar with the Fibonacci sequence. Now, how does this add credibility to the concept of the golden rectangle being a pleasing proportion? Well, while the golden rectangle does show up throughout the built environment, if we want to call it that, Fibonacci spiral, look it up. It shows up everywhere in nature. Hey, thanks for joining us today on the Frog Pond School of Design. I hope to see you hanging around the pond again real soon.